Yeah, so we had this capacity and ability, which I've said we've talked about that a lot since May as well, but it was added back then. And we can see that that directly correlates down here to physical activity and social isolation, and it's affected by the rapid changing of messages and the restrictions. So that's something we added back in May. The other part of that conversation we had was the perception of rural safety and the number of local cases. So I think we heard that again more and more over our meetings between probably May and our last meeting around how this is getting stronger. So that lack of compliancy or a bit of complacency with management advice and restrictions, because we've kind of got this perception of a rural safety net going on. So I think we can definitely see this loop, well, we have seen this loop strengthen over some time, but it'll be interesting to have a conversation today around how that might have changed with what's happened in the past week. I think people might be maybe a little bit more aware now, so that could have changed a bit. Now, as I select the second date of our second What's Changed conversation, that was back on the 10th of June. So you'll see some green ones and some more red arrows pop up here. I think the first chat we had back then was around services that have been forced to look at new ways, particularly to engage young people, and that was because of a number of things, mostly the time spent at home in remote learning, but also the lack of accessibility to schools in general, and knowing that that's going to go on for some time. So we added this connection here between adaptation and addition of services and activities. We added a variable around the demand on schools, and we added another connection that's actually telling us that as we adapt our services, the participation in programs and things that we're trying to run through schools has actually increased. And I think Tiana shared a really good example there of the LEN and their work with future leaders, and how the engagement in that program has actually increased because they're no longer using curriculum time because they can run it online. So that was one of the stories back in June, and that's how we've captured it. We also heard fairly briefly, but it was an important conversation, I think, that this appropriate and accurate COVID media, we've added that in because it was the peak kind of time of the Black Lives Matter protest and movement media. And I think that, coupled with maybe a steadier coronavirus environment at that point, put coronavirus news on the back burner a little bit, and maybe messed with some people's understanding of what restrictions and rules still applied. So we had that conversation, and that's how we've captured that one. There are also some stories shared around young people and just how varied and unpredictable this phase is for them. And it was at the time where young people were returning to schools. So we also talked about the several new stresses on school staff who had to adapt to welcoming back students that are coming from lots of different places and spaces in their own mental health and their learning journeys as well. We've captured a lot of that narrative in the background, but in terms of changes to the map, we kind of felt it was already captured a little bit more broadly. So we've just connected here this ability to personally change and adapt behaviours into mental health, because I think that captures a lot of that conversation that we had. The last little conversation back on June the 10th was around loneliness and adult loneliness, and it links again with kids returning to school. So we're talking about adults who have maybe experienced job loss or have been at home with their kids, and now their kids are returning to education and they're like, what do I do? What's my purpose here? So we've added in this loneliness variable, and it's also linked to this loop around the workforce as well. So there was a small conversation, I think, around economic stress and job loss being a big part of that, and that causing a bit of vulnerability in the workforce. So people may be putting up with poor working conditions or working harder than they ever have before, maybe to justify their employment and avoid that economic stress and job loss. And in turn, that then adds to anxiety, depression, and of course, decreases mental health. So we've kind of captured that story in there as well. So from all the stories we had from the 27th of May and the 10th of June, when we kind of had this what has changed conversation, and that's what we're going to do again today, we've added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've added 7 variables and a few connections. So we didn't want to go over the top because we thought that there's already a lot captured in this map, and lots of the stories we were hearing we're kind of just reinforcing different parts, and there wasn't a lot that needed to be added there. So we'll be having our third kind of change point again today, I suppose, and we'll be able to see again how that changes over time. But this is a new feature as well that Sticky, which is the mapping software, has added for us. So it's really nice to be able to look back at our base map easily just by selecting points in time and sort of seeing things grow as our conversation evolves. So I'll just pause before we move on to, I just wanted to quickly, and Jo touched on it earlier, but just talk about why we are tracking this change, because I think that while I was kind of spending the time in translating the narrative and some of the actions we're hearing about in this group, I had to keep reminding myself of the purpose of, you know, why we're doing it, to be able to do it well. And I think that we are, you know, we're doing this for the purposes of both internal and external learning. Hopefully there's lots of little loops and connections and stories in here that we can kind of scale up and think about more broadly, and they might help us the next time we face some kind of crisis. I think we're doing it for the purposes of planning as well, and adapting, and just recognising how the need of the community is changing, like Jo said, and of course finding out, you know, where are those gaps and where do we need to make efforts, whether it be advocacy or something else, which we've identified this digital access down here. It's a busy variable. There's lots of arrows coming in, and we've done something about it by producing that paper. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that. The fact that all the contributions that are given during this time are important, and they're painting this picture, which is helpful, and hopefully it's helpful for other organisations too, not just the PCP. And Jo will continue to share this out as it's updated so that you have that version and you can use it hopefully to your advantage. So
that's great, Ebony. Can you just remind us of the different colours in the map? Ro just had a question there.
Right, thanks, Ro. The purple ones are the ones that we did some individual mapping of at the start, and we can maybe go back and revisit that at some point if people want to. So we actually did individual maps around social isolation, around physical health, and around digital access, and then we merged them into this one base map. So that's the purple ones. The blue ones actually represent some action that's happening. So there's lots of actions happening in terms of collaboration between services and adaptation and addition of services and activities. And then the pink ones and the green ones, I've just left the colour in there so that you can clearly see that they were the new variables that have been added over time. So the pink ones are the 27th of May, and the green ones are our conversations in June. So I will get rid of those colours eventually, but when you're kind of only adding one or two, it's easier, to highlight them if they're in different colours. So not a lot of significance for the pink and the green.